She spent 8 months pretending she did not notice the way his gaze moved over her when he thought she was not looking. Slow, deliberate. The way a man looks when he has already decided something and is simply waiting for permission. She told herself she was his professor. She told herself that every single night. By May, she had stopped believing it entirely. By May, his hands had already made the argument for him. Before we dive in, follow our Patreon link on the comment section. She called it gratitude until his hands said something different. She kept telling herself it was nothing, just a professional interest, just the natural pull a teacher feels when a student is exceptionally bright, exceptionally driven, exceptionally present in every room he walks into. She told herself that over and over again, standing at the tall windows of her office in the literature building at Harman University, watching the students cross the courtyard below with their heavy backpacks and their coffee cups and their whole unbothered futures stretched out ahead of them. She told herself it was nothing. But nothing does not make your hand shake when you are writing a name at the top of a grade sheet. Nothing does not make you reread an essay 3 times, not because you're checking for errors, but because the voice inside the words sounds like someone you want to keep listening to. Katrin Mercer had been teaching advanced composition and literary theory at Harman for 2 years. She was 28 years old, which meant she was barely older than most of her seniors, a fact she was painfully aware of every single morning when she stood at the front of a lecture hall and tried to look like someone who had answers. She had a master's degree from Columbia and a dissertation half finished on the shelf above her desk, and she wore her blonde hair pinned back during class because she thought it made her look more serious. It did not make her look more serious. It made her look like someone trying very hard to look serious, which is a different thing entirely. She had a green plant on her windowsill that she kept forgetting to water. She had 3 mugs on her desk because she kept starting cups of tea and then forgetting them. She had a small apartment off campus with good light and no photographs of anyone, which was something she did not think about too often. She was single, had been for almost 2 years now. Not tragically single, not dramatically single. Just the ordinary, quiet kind of single that comes from being too busy and too particular, and too afraid to let someone into the small, careful world she had built for herself. She liked her world. She liked the stacks of books in every corner of her apartment, the jazz records she played on Sunday mornings, the long walks she took through the campus arboretum when the semester got heavy. She liked her world just fine. And then the fall semester of her 3rd year at Harman began, and Devin Okafor walked into her 8 o'clock class on a Tuesday morning in September, and the world she liked just fine started to feel, for the first time in a long time, like it might be missing something. He was not supposed to be in that class. Advanced composition and literary theory was an upper division elective that mostly attracted English majors and the occasional philosophy student who had wandered in looking for something to fulfill a humanities credit. It was not the kind of class a pre-law senior typically signed up for in his final semester. But Devin Okafor was not a typical pre-law senior. Katrin found this out later. On that first Tuesday morning, she only knew what she could see. She knew that he was tall, not the kind of tall that announces itself rudely, but the kind that you notice gradually. The way you notice a building is taller than you thought once you are standing next to it. He was 23 years old, though he carried himself with a quietness that made him seem both younger and older than that at the same time. He had dark skin and close-cut hair, and the kind of jaw that people who draw portraits spend a lot of time thinking about. He wore a dark green jacket over a white shirt, and he sat in the third row, not the back, which meant he was not hiding, and he had a worn paperback copy of James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room already open on his desk when she walked in, which was not on the syllabus. Katrin noticed all of this in the 2 seconds it took her to walk from the door to the podium. She noticed it, and she filed it away, and she did not think about it again until much later. She began class the way she always began the first class of every semester. She wrote her name on the board. She told them what they were going to read and what they were going to write and how she expected them to think. She told them that she did not care about perfect grammar. She cared about honest sentences. She told them the difference between writing something and saying something. She asked if there were questions. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the man in the third row with the Baldwin novel looked up from whatever he had been writing in the margin and said quietly, without raising his hand, "What if the most honest sentence you can write is the one you're most afraid to say out loud?" The room stayed quiet. Katrin looked at him. He looked back at her, not with arrogance, not like he was trying to impress anyone. He looked at her the way people look when they have a genuine question and they are actually waiting for the answer. Then, that is usually the sentence worth writing. He nodded slowly. He wrote something in the margin of his book. Class continued. She did not think about it again. Not that day. His name, she learned from the roster, was Devin Okafor, pre-law, senior. His transcript, which she had no reason to look up but looked up anyway 2 days later while finalizing her attendance records, showed a student who had moved through 4 years of college with the kind of quiet ferocity that did not need to be loud. He had a 3.9 GPA. He had written for the campus literary journal his sophomore year and then stopped. He was president of the mock trial team. He had taken exactly one English elective before this one, a seminar on African American literature his junior year, in which he had received the highest grade in the course. She closed the transcript. She made herself a cup of tea she would forget to drink. She went back to her dissertation. She had no reason to think about Devin Okafor. She thought about him anyway, not in the way she would have been uncomfortable admitting to someone, not in a way she could have identified clearly yet, like something seen through frosted glass, a shape without a name, just the way a teacher sometimes carries a student in the back of their mind, the way a good question stays with you after the class is over. She thought about what he had said. She thought about the Baldwin novel. She thought about the way he had looked at her when he asked the question, like he had been sitting with it for a long time before he said it out loud. She went to sleep, thinking about her dissertation. She woke up with the question still in her head. The second week of classes, she handed back the first writing assignment, a short piece, 500 words, on any theme related to the course. She had not given them a prompt because she wanted to see what they reached for when no one was pointing a direction. Most students wrote about what she expected: growing up, identity, family. A few wrote about politics with the passionate imprecision of people who care deeply and have not yet learned to say exactly what they mean. One student wrote about her dog, which was not what Katrin had intended, but was actually the most carefully observed piece in the stack. Devin Okafor wrote about hands. His piece was 512 words. She knew because she counted. Not to penalize him, the assignment was a soft word limit, but because she had already read it twice before she reached for her pen to write a comment in the margin, and she was trying to give herself something neutral to do while she collected her thoughts. He wrote about watching his grandmother's hands while she cooked, The specific weight of that observation, the way he described the motion of her wrists, the sound of the wooden spoon against the pot, the way her hands knew the recipe by memory and not by thought. He wrote about how he had not understood when he was a child that watching someone's hands was the same as reading their whole life. That hands say things words cannot. That the things people do with their hands when they think no one is watching are usually the most honest thing about them. Katrin sat in her office with that essay in her hands for a long time. She wrote 3 comments. She crossed them out. She wrote one final comment at the bottom of the page. It said, "You are going to be a very good writer if you let yourself be." She did not know, sitting in her quiet office with the green plant on the sill and the forgotten tea going cold on the desk, that she had just started something she would not be able to stop. The 3rd week, he came to her office hours. This was not unusual. Students came to office hours. That was what office hours were for. She held them on Thursdays from 2 to 4, which was a quiet time in the building, most of the other faculty out at seminars or committee meetings. The hallways dim and unhurried. She usually spent the first half of that window grading and waiting, and the second half actually meeting with students who had questions about their papers. She heard a knock at the door at 2:15. She called, "Come in." He came in. He was wearing a dark blue shirt this time, and he looked slightly different out of the context of the classroom. The way everyone looks slightly different when you see them outside the place you first knew them, a little more themselves, a little less composed. He was holding a folder. He asked if she had a minute. She told him to sit down. He sat in the chair across from her desk. The chair was low and the desk was high, which she had always thought of as a useful power dynamic, keeping the space between her and her students formal and appropriately boundaried. Sitting across from Devin Okafor with the late afternoon sun coming in through the Venetian blinds and making slow lines of gold across his hands and the folder in his lap, the desk did not feel like much of a boundary. He had read her comment on his essay, he told her. He wanted to ask what she meant by it. She meant exactly what she wrote. His instinct for observation was rare, and the decision to actually use it on the page, to trust it, was the thing that most writers spent years learning, and some never figured out at all. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the directness of someone who had decided not to soften the thing, "I stopped writing about 2 years ago. I didn't think the work was good enough to keep going." She asked him what made him think that. "Someone told him so," he explained. "Not cruelly, just as a fact, the way you tell someone their coat has a hole in it." The person who said it was someone whose opinion had mattered to him at the time, and the opinion had settled into him like a stone settling into water, all the way down to the bottom. Katrin leaned back in her chair. Outside, a group of students passed in the hallway, laughing about something. The people who tell you your work is not good enough are almost always wrong, and even when they are right about the work, they are wrong about what that means. The work not being good enough yet is not the same as you not being good enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then his eyes moved to the margins of the essay on her desk, still open to the page she had been reading. "You read mine 3 times. She went still. "The page, the margins. I could tell from the different pressures of the pen, where you wrote and stopped and wrote again. 3 different times. I read all my students' work carefully." He looked at her with something calm and unhurried in his expression. "I know." He stood up, thanked her for her time, and left. She sat at her desk for a long time after he was gone, looking at the place where the gold lines of sun had been on his hands. which were no longer there. October came in cool and fragrant. The old oak trees along the campus mall going amber and rust, the kind of autumn that old universities were built for, as if the whole architecture of the place was designed to look its best in the October light. Katrin walked to class every morning through the fallen leaves with her bag over her shoulder and her coffee in her hand, and she told herself on each of those walks that what she was feeling was a professional admiration for a promising student and nothing more. By the third week of October, she had stopped believing herself. It was not dramatic. It was not a single moment. It was the accumulation of small things, the way accumulations always work, quietly, invisibly, until the weight of them is suddenly undeniable. It was the way he listened in class, not the performative listening of a student trying to seem engaged, but the real kind, where you can see someone actually receiving what is being said, turning it over, finding its edges. It was the questions he asked, always near the end of class, when the room was starting to relax. Always the question she had not prepared for. Always the one that stayed with her. It was the essays he turned in, which kept getting better in the specific way that frightened her. Not technically better, but truer. Like he was writing closer and closer to the center of something real. It was the way he said good morning when he passed her in the hallway outside the building, quiet and direct, without the slightly deferential affect most students had when they spoke to faculty, as if he had already, without making any announcement of it, stopped thinking of her only as his professor. It was the afternoon she was in the campus library and looked up from her table and found him sitting 20 feet away at another table and realized she had known he was there for the last 40 minutes without consciously registering it. The way you always know where a heat source is in a cold room. She gathered her things. She left the library. She walked to the arboretum and walked its looping path 3 times in the thin October sunlight, and she had a firm, serious conversation with herself about the nature of professional responsibility and appropriate boundaries and the very significant difference between finding someone intellectually compelling and anything else. The conversation was thorough, it was logical. It was, she would reflect later, completely useless. His 4th essay was on loneliness, not the concept of loneliness, the specific bodied experience of it. He wrote about being in a crowded room and feeling the particular silence of being the only person in that room who was not being reached for by anyone. He wrote about the way loneliness is not the absence of people, but the presence of distance, a glass wall you can see through perfectly in both directions, but cannot cross. He wrote about the strange comfort of books, the way fictional characters can live more warmly inside you than real people sometimes do, because they are always there when you come back to them, and they never leave without explanation. He did not say the essay was autobiographical. He did not need to. Katrin sat with it for a long time. She thought about her apartment with no photographs of anyone. She thought about the plant she kept forgetting to water. She thought about the jazz records on Sunday mornings and the long walks through the arboretum and the 3 mugs on her desk that never got emptied. She thought about the glass wall. She wrote one comment on his essay. It took her 20 minutes to decide on it. It said, "I know this room." She handed it back with all the other papers on a Wednesday morning. She watched him read the comment. She watched him look up at her. She looked back at him for exactly 2 seconds and then looked away. That afternoon, she watered the plant. The first time they were truly alone together outside the context of school was an accident, or it had the shape of an accident, which is not the same thing. She was at a small, independent bookstore on Crestfield Avenue, 3 blocks from campus, on a Friday evening in early November. She went there often. It was the kind of bookstore that smelled like old paper and had handwritten recommendation cards tucked into the shelves and a cat named something or other who slept on a chair near the poetry section. She had been browsing the new arrivals table for about 15 minutes when she became aware of someone else at the same table and looked up and found Devin Okafor standing 2 feet away, reading the back of a novel she had been intending to pick up. They both went still for a moment. "I've been meaning to read this one," he said, which was the polite version of an explanation for why he was holding it. "I've been meaning to read that one for 6 months, she told him, which was the honest version. He looked at the book and then at her. "Do you want it? I can find another copy." She said she had not decided if she was getting anything yet, and he said he had not either. And they stood there at the new arrivals table in the warm amber light of the bookstore with the cat asleep in the poetry section and the sound of rain starting on the street outside. A long moment passed. "I'm going to get a coffee," she finally said. "There's a place 2 doors down. You're welcome to join me if you want." She said it the way she would have said it to any student. She meant it that way. She told herself she meant it that way. He said yes. The coffee shop was narrow and warm, with wooden tables close together and a chalkboard menu and the particular coziness that small spaces acquire on rainy evenings. They took a table near the window. She ordered a tea she would actually drink this time. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, which struck her as very like him without her being able to say exactly why. They talked for 2 hours. She would not remember afterwards how they got from the bookstore to his grandmother's hands to the essay he had written that she now knew was about himself, to the specific texture of loneliness he had described with such precision. She would not remember the exact turning points of the conversation, only its direction. The way 2 people sometimes talk, and you feel the whole time like you are walking somewhere together, getting somewhere, and you are not sure where, but the getting there is the thing that matters. He told her about growing up in Atlanta, about his mother, who was a nurse, and his father, who had left when Devin was 9 and shown up again when he was 17, and they had had one long, strange dinner together, and his father had not come back after that, which Devin described not with bitterness, but with the kind of careful neutrality that is its own kind of pain. He told her about the writing he had done in high school, the notebooks he had filled, and then the creative writing program he had applied to as a senior and not gotten into, and what had happened to the writing after that. She told him about Columbia, about the dissertation she had not finished, about the fact that she had wanted to be a novelist before she became an academic, which was something she had not said to anyone at Harmon before. She was not sure why she said it now. The rain on the window, the small warm table, the way he listened. "Why didn't you?" he asked. She looked at the steam rising from her cup. "I was afraid the voice I had on the page wasn't the real one, that I was performing something instead of saying something." He looked at her across the small table with the rain coming down outside. "That's the same thing you told me." "I know. So we're both afraid of the same thing." The rain got heavier. Outside the window, the Crestfield Avenue streetlights reflected in long, pale streaks on the wet pavement. She was aware of how close the table was. She was aware of his hands around his coffee cup, which were very still. The hands of someone who moves slowly and with intention, like he had learned long ago that deliberate things do not break as easily as rushed ones. She was aware, very suddenly and very completely, that this was not a professional conversation anymore, that it had stopped being that sometime in the last 2 hours, that she had let it stop. She looked at her watch and reached for her coat. He said, of course, and they stood and gathered their things, and he held the door for her on the way out. Outside, the rain had softened to a fine mist, and the air smelled like wet stone and fallen leaves. This was good, he said. Yes. A pause. I'm glad I ran into you. Me too. She walked to her car. She drove home. She sat in her parked car outside her apartment for a while before going inside, looking at her hands on the steering wheel, thinking about deliberate things and what they do not break as easily as. She was careful after that. Very careful. She was professional in class. She was professional at office hours. She graded his work the way she graded every student's work. Though if she was being honest with herself, which she was trying very hard to be, she knew that reading his essays was not like reading the others. It never had been. There was a quality to his writing that she could not be clinical about. The same way you cannot be clinical about music that moves you even when you understand its theory perfectly. She did not go back to the bookstore on Friday evenings. She did not think this was necessary to acknowledge, even to herself. She simply found other things to do on Friday evenings. He was in class every Tuesday and Thursday morning. He sat in the third row. He asked his questions near the end of class. She answered them the way she answered everyone's questions, looking somewhere above his head so she would not have to look at his face directly, which was something she had developed as a strategy, and which she suspected was not fooling anyone. In November, she submitted him for the Harmon Writing Fellowship, an annual award given to one undergraduate per year who showed exceptional literary promise. She submitted him without telling him, because telling him would have required explaining that she had been reading his essays with the particular attention of someone who was not just his teacher, and she was not ready to explain that to either of them. He won the fellowship the second week of November. The department sent him a letter. She heard about it when her department chair mentioned it in a faculty meeting, noting with satisfaction that the winner was a non-English major, which had not happened in the fellowship's 12-year history. Katrin sat in the faculty meeting and listened to the chair say Devin Okafor's name and felt something that was warm and complicated and not entirely appropriate, and she put it away carefully and professionally and drove home and played jazz records until it was late enough to go to sleep. The last Thursday before Thanksgiving break, he was the last student to leave after class. She was erasing the board. She heard the room empty behind her. She heard the door not close. She kept erasing the board. "I know it was you." She turned around. He was standing at the front of the room with his bag over one shoulder, looking at her the way he had looked at her the first day of class, like he was asking a real question and actually waiting for the answer. The fellowship committee makes their decisions independently. Professor Mercer. He said her name like a period at the end of a sentence, not harshly, just firmly. She said nothing. He crossed his arms, not in anger, more like someone settling in for a truth they have been carrying a while. "You read my work 3 times. You wrote that you knew the room. You submitted me for a fellowship I didn't know existed because you thought I should be writing and not just practicing law." A pause. "I'm not saying any of that to make you uncomfortable. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I see it. What you've done for me. I want you to know I'm grateful." Katrin held the eraser. The classroom was empty and quiet around them, the late morning light coming through the tall windows and making the dust on the chalkboard glow softly. "You earned it. Your writing earned it. I just made sure it was seen." "Why?" "Because good things should be seen." He held that for a long moment. Then quietly, "Okay." He said goodbye and left. She stood at the board until she heard his footsteps fade in the corridor, and then she sat in one of the empty student chairs in the third row and looked at the front of her own classroom from the angle she had never seen it from. And she sat there for a while with the eraser in her hands and the winter light going pale through the windows. She was in trouble. She knew that now. She had perhaps known it for several weeks and had simply been waiting for the moment when she could no longer pretend she did not. She was 28 years old, and she was in trouble with a student who read James Baldwin in her classroom before she arrived and wrote about his grandmother's hands and knew how many times she had read his essay by the pressure of the pen in the margins. And she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. She went home. She did not play jazz records. She sat by her window and watched the street below go quiet in the early dark of November. The bare trees moving in the cold wind, the last students crossing with their bags and their coffees, and she thought about the glass wall he had written about. The glass wall you can see through perfectly in both directions and cannot cross. She thought about what it would mean to cross it. She thought about all the reasons she could not. Thanksgiving break was 8 days long. She spent 3 of them at her parents' house upstate, where her mother asked her if she was seeing anyone with the practiced casualness of someone who has been asking the same question for 2 years and expects the same answer. Katrin said no. Her mother said she was too young to be alone, which was the kind of thing that sounds like a compliment, but lands like a verdict. Her father asked about the dissertation. She told him she was making progress, which was true in the sense that she had been thinking about it more recently, even if the thinking had not produced any actual pages. She drove back to the city on Sunday. She unlocked her apartment. She turned on the lights. She looked at the space she had built around herself. The books in every corner, the records by the turntable, the green plant on the windowsill which was, she noticed, actually thriving now that she had started watering it. She made tea. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. She looked at her email for a long time before she opened the message that had been sitting in her inbox since Wednesday afternoon, which was from an address she had not seen before but whose name she knew without having to look twice. It was from Devin. He had written, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the voice on the page. I think the real one is usually the one you're trying not to use. I started writing again. I don't know if it's good yet, but it feels honest. I thought you should know that. Thank you." He had not sent it to her university email. He had found her personal email address, which was listed on the faculty page of the university website under her profile, fully public, technically entirely appropriate to contact. She stared at the email for a very long time. She wrote back. She wrote and deleted and rewrote. The final version said, "I'm glad. Keep going. Send me something when you're ready." She sent it before she could change her mind. She closed her laptop. She looked at the plant. She was so completely in trouble. The first week of December, he sent her a piece. It was 11 pages. It was unlike anything he had written for class. Not an essay, not an argument, but a story, technically unfinished. A scene between 2 people in a coffee shop on a rainy evening. 2 people who are talking about something other than the thing they're talking about. She recognized the coffee shop. She recognized the rain. She recognized the hands on the coffee cup described with the kind of attention that only comes from someone who has been watching very carefully. She read it twice. Then she sat at her desk and wrote him 800 words of notes. Not a grade, not a comment. A conversation about the work, what it was reaching for and where it landed and where it could still go. And she wrote it the way she had always wished someone had written to her when she was the one afraid to trust the voice on the page. He wrote back within the hour. "This is the most useful thing anyone has ever said to me about my writing. You're not afraid of it anymore," she wrote back. "I can feel that in the work." His response came quickly. "I'm afraid of other things." She looked at those 4 words for a long time. She did not write back that night. The last week of classes before finals, there was a departmental reading, an end-of-semester gathering where faculty read short excerpts and students were encouraged to share work. Katrin had attended it every year since she arrived. She usually read a passage from one of the texts they had studied. It was a pleasant, low-stakes event held in the departmental common room with wine and small plates of things, and the slightly forced conviviality of people who mostly see each other in professional contexts, trying to be human beings for 90 minutes. She arrived at 7. The room was already warm and crowded. She got a glass of wine she would nurse all evening and found a space near the bookshelves lining the back wall. She talked to her colleague Dr. Adkins about the spring semester. She talked to 2 of her other students about their finals. She looked at the door at regular intervals in a way she hoped was not obvious, and which was certainly obvious. He arrived at 7:20. He was wearing a charcoal gray sweater and dark trousers, and he looked, in the warm light of the crowded common room, like someone who had stepped out of the pages of the kind of novel she had always wanted to write. He came in, spoke briefly to someone near the door, and then his eyes found hers, across the room, with the ease of someone who already knew where to look. He didn't come over immediately. She respected that. He moved through the room the way he did everything, deliberately, without hurry, speaking to people, accepting a glass of wine, giving the impression of a man who was exactly where he intended to be. He came to stand beside her near the bookshelves 20 minutes later. The reading had started. One of her colleagues at the small lectern at the front of the room, and the crowd had settled into the comfortable quiet of listening. He stood close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, the specific gravity of him, without either of them touching or needing to. They listened together. In the low light, she was aware of his hand at his side, a few inches from hers. Neither of them moved. After a while, he spoke very quietly, just above the sound of the reading. "I've been thinking about what I said in the email." "Which part?" she murmured, still looking forward. "That I'm afraid of other things." She said nothing. "I know what this is," he continued, his voice low and even. "I know what it means. I know all the reasons it's complicated. I'm not asking for anything you can't give." She looked straight ahead at the reader at the lectern. "A poem now. Something about winter and waiting." "Devon." "I know." The poem ended. The room applauded. They both applauded with it. She looked at her wine glass. He looked at the front of the room. The next reader was announced. "There are 14 weeks left in the semester," she said quietly. He let a beat of silence pass. Then, "I know how to wait." She finally looked at him. He was looking at her already. In the warm amber light of the departmental common room, with the sound of the next reading beginning, she looked at Devon Okafor and understood completely, and for the first time without any diplomatic self-deception whatsoever, exactly what she felt. Which was the kind of understanding that does not make things easier, but at least stops pretending things are not what they are. "Go talk to someone. Don't stand here next to me for the rest of the evening." He almost smiled. Not quite. "Okay." He moved back into the room. She watched him go. She turned back to the reader at the lectern. 14 weeks. She finished her wine. She stayed for the rest of the reading. She went home through the December streets with the cold coming off the river and the city lights in the low winter sky. And she did not listen to jazz records. She sat at her kitchen table with a blank document open on her laptop for the first time in 2 years, and she began to write. She wrote about a woman looking at her hands. She wrote about the difference between the thing you say and the thing you mean. She wrote about glass walls and what it costs to stand on one side of them for too long. She wrote until 2 in the morning. It was the most honest thing she had put on a page in years. Outside, the December wind moved through the bare trees on her street, and inside her quiet apartment, the green plant stood in the window, and she wrote, and somewhere across the city in whatever apartment, a 23-year-old pre-law senior in a charcoal gray sweater lived. She knew without knowing it that he was probably doing exactly the same thing. December moved fast, the way Decembers always do, with a kind of compressed urgency, as if the year is trying to finish its sentences before the clock runs out. Finals came. She graded. She held extra office hours. She attended the year-end faculty meeting and nodded through the administrative updates and thought about other things. He came to office hours the second Thursday of December. He sat across from her desk and put a folder on the table between them. Final essay. I wanted to turn it in person. You could have emailed it. I know. He left it at that. Not an explanation, just acknowledgement of a choice made. She took the folder but did not open it. How are you feeling about the semester? Good, he told her. Mock trial had gone well. He had been accepted to interview with a firm in Chicago in January, a corporate law firm, one of the ones with the kind of reputation that meant something in that industry. She said congratulations. She meant it. I've also been writing every day. I'm glad. It's because of you. It's because of you, she said back firmly. You made the choice. He looked at her across the desk, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more deliberate. I'm going to graduate in May. I know. May is not that far. No. A pause, during which neither of them pretended to be doing anything other than the thing they were doing. I just want you to know that I'm not going anywhere, even after May. The late afternoon light came through the Venetian blinds and made its slow gold lines across the desk between them. She held the folder with his final essay in it. She looked at his hands. Turn in your essay, Devin. Pass my class. And then we'll see. Very quietly, almost to herself. He stood up, said goodbye, and left. She opened the folder. She began to read. The essay was 30 pages long. It was the story he had started in November, completed now, finished all the way to the end. A love story written around the edges of what it could not say directly. 2 people in a rainy evening and 14 weeks and all the distance between wanting something and being allowed to have it. It was the best thing she had ever read from an undergraduate student. It was the best thing she had read in a long time from anyone. At the bottom of the last page, in handwriting, not typed, not a part of the essay, he had written one sentence. It said, I think the most honest sentence is the one you're most afraid to say out loud. She sat with it for a long time. Outside, December moved around the old campus buildings, the oak trees bare and dark against the pewter sky, the students crossing below her window with their bags and their coffees and their heavy exam schedules, the whole ordinary world of the university going about its business. She reached for her pen. In the margin beside his handwritten line, she wrote 4 words. Then she closed the folder. Then she began to wait. She called it gratitude, until his hand said something different. Part 2. The 4 words were this: "I know, me too." She had written them in the margin beside his handwritten line at the bottom of his final essay, and then she had handed back the graded papers with everyone else's work on the last day of class, and she had watched him flip to the back page and find it. And she had watched the particular stillness that moved through him when he read those 4 words, the way a person goes still, not from absence, but from the opposite of absence, from a sudden presence of something too large to move around. He had looked up at her. She had been looking somewhere else. She had kept looking somewhere else for the rest of the semester. Finals passed. Grades were submitted. The semester closed. The campus emptied for winter break with its usual sudden quiet, the buildings going still and dark-windowed, the walks swept clean of students, the whole university taking the long exhale it only allowed itself twice a year. Katrin flew home for Christmas. She spent 12 days with her family, eating her mother's cooking and watching her younger sister's children run around the living room and sitting up late at the kitchen table with her father, who was a retired high school history teacher and the only person in her life who talked about books the way she talked about books. She told him she had started writing again. He asked her what it was about. She said she was not sure yet. He nodded slowly, the way he always nodded when something struck him as exactly right. That was usually how the real ones started, he told her. She did not look at her personal email for the first 5 days. On the 6th day she looked. There was a message from Devin, sent the day before Christmas Eve. It said, "Merry Christmas. I've been writing every day. I hope wherever you are is warm." She read it 3 times. She put her phone face down on the kitchen table and went to help with dinner. She wrote back on New Year's Day. Just 4 lines. "Happy New Year. I'm glad you're writing. Keep going." Within an hour, her phone lit up. "What are you working on?" "Something I wasn't expecting." A pause. Then, "Those are always the best ones." She smiled at the phone before she put it away, which she did not acknowledge, and then she put it away. The spring semester began in the 3rd week of January, bright and cold, the campus coming back to life with the particular energy of a new semester, which always felt to Katrin like a second January, a second chance at all the things the first one had not resolved. She had a new set of courses, new students, a new schedule that did not include Devin Okafor's name on any roster because he had passed her class with the highest grade she had given in 3 years of teaching, and he was a graduating senior with no further requirements to fulfill in the English department. She would not see him in her classroom again. She told herself this was easier. She told herself this was the right shape for things to take. A semester of professional complication gracefully resolved, both of them having maintained appropriate conduct. Nothing to answer for, to anyone. She had her dissertation to finish. She had her courses. She had her Sunday morning records and her arboretum walks and her green plant in the window, which was now, it had to be said, genuinely thriving. She told herself all of this very firmly in the 1st week of the spring semester, and then on a Wednesday afternoon, in the 2nd week of January, she was crossing the campus courtyard on her way from a faculty committee meeting, and Devin Okafor was sitting on one of the stone benches near the old library, reading. And he looked up when she was still 20 feet away, with that unhurried accuracy of his, like he always knew where to look. She slowed her pace. She did not stop. He stood. "Professor Mercer." "Devin, do you have a minute?" She looked at him. The January air was sharp and clear, and the old library rose behind him against the pale winter sky, and the bare trees made their branching shapes around the courtyard. She thought about all the reasons a minute was not a good idea. "Walk with me." They walked. not toward anywhere specific. Through the courtyard, along the path that ran between the old buildings, under the bare oak trees, past the bench where she sometimes ate lunch when the weather was good enough. She kept her hands in her coat pockets. He kept a professional distance, 1.5 feet of January air between them, which was the right amount of distance, and felt, for that reason, like a very long way. "I read what you wrote." His voice was unhurried, careful. "I know. I've been thinking about it for 4 weeks. I know that too." A beat of silence, just the crunch of frozen ground under their feet. "May is 4 months away. I just need to know if you can wait that long too." She walked for a moment without answering. The cold was in her face, and the dead leaves were crushed flat on the path under their feet, and the whole campus was hushed and winter bright around them. "I've been waiting since September." He made a sound, not a word, just a sound in his chest, low and quiet. The sound of something that has been held still for a long time being allowed to exhale. He did not reach for her. He kept his hands at his sides. He kept the 1.5 feet of January air between them, perfect and intact. "Okay? Okay." They walked back to the courtyard. She went to her office. He went wherever he was going. Neither of them said goodbye. She sat at her desk for a long time after that, not working, just sitting, with the winter light coming through the Venetian blinds and making its quiet pattern on the wall. And she thought about the word, wait, what it means when it is chosen rather than forced, what it means when the thing being waited for is already understood on both sides, and waiting is not distance, but a kind of promise. 4 months, that was all. She picked up her pen. She worked. February arrived in the specific way Februaries arrive on old university campuses, slowly, persistently gray, the kind of month that requires a tolerance for waiting and an ability to find warmth in small things. Katrin found it in the writing. She was on page 40 of the novel she had not intended to write, a thing that had grown out of that night in December at her kitchen table when she had written about hands and glass walls and the difference between the thing you say and the thing you mean. She did not write about Devon. She wrote about the feeling of him, the quality of attention he carried, the way certain people exist in a room so completely that the room is different when they leave it. She wrote around him the way you can write around a light source, never naming it, only describing what it illuminates. The writing was good. She knew it was good the way she had always known, when she was reaching the real thing, rather than the performed version, a physical sense of it, something shifting in her chest and her hands, when the sentences were landing the way they were supposed to land. She had not felt this way about her own pages in a very long time. She thought about what he had said, that it was because of her, the writing coming back. She thought about what that meant. To give someone their voice back, what that gives back to you. She began to let herself imagine May. They kept talking, by email first and then, gradually, by other means, the shift happening not dramatically, but by the same accumulation of small steps as everything else between them. He texted her a sentence from a book he was reading. She texted back a paragraph from something she was writing that he should see. He sent her a new piece at midnight on a Thursday. She read it at 2 in the morning and wrote back by 3, and they were up until 4 sending long, ranging, sprawling messages about the work and what it was trying to do. And somewhere in those 4 hours, the emails stopped feeling like correspondence and started feeling like conversations, which is the same shift that always happens, the step just before everything else. She was careful. She was always careful. She did not let herself forget what the situation was, what the months remaining meant, what the right shape of things required from her while he was still her student. But careful does not mean absent. Careful does not mean withholding every human thing. Careful, in its best form, is just a way of honoring what matters enough to protect. He called her Katrin in their messages, not in person, not on campus, not in any space that was still the university's space, but in the messages, in those late-night conversations about books and writing and the particular questions his mind kept returning to. He called her Katrin, and she had not asked him to stop. In March, she finished her dissertation. She sent the final chapter to her advisor at Columbia on a Tuesday morning, and then she sat in her office with her hands flat on the desk and looked at the ceiling for a while, because 4 years of work had just been sent out into the world, and she did not know exactly what you were supposed to do with the space that left behind. She texted Devin, "I finished my dissertation." One word came back immediately. "Katrin, I know. Tell me you celebrated. Tell me you're not sitting at your desk looking at the ceiling." She looked at the ceiling. "I'm going home to open the bottle of wine I've had for this occasion for 8 months. Good." A pause. Then, "I'm proud of you." She looked at that message for a long time. Not because she was unused to being told she was good at things, but because there is a specific quality to being seen by someone whose opinion has come to matter to you, a warmth that lands differently than the polite congratulations of people who care about you in the ordinary way. He was the first person in a while who made her believe it about herself. She went home. She opened the wine. She poured one glass and sat on her living room floor with her back against the couch, which was where she sat when she was tired enough to be fully honest with herself. And she thought about May. 62 days. She poured a second glass. Spring came in the gradual way. Springs come to old university towns, not all at once, but in accumulations. First the crocuses along the campus walks, then the first warmth in the afternoon air, then the cherry trees along the north side of the humanities building exploding pink and extravagant against the still gray sky. The way the campus had probably looked in every spring of its 100 years. Katrin walked to class, through the cherry blossoms, and felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was the sense of a good thing coming, a patient thing, a thing worth waiting for. She saw Devin in passing. The campus was small enough that paths crossed, and they crossed in the ordinary way of people who know each other and are not pretending they don't. He would nod. She would nod. He would say something brief, real, directed. She would answer it in kind. There was never anything in those exchanges that would have struck an observer as anything other than a professor and a student on good terms. And yet, those moments, those 30-second exchanges in the cherry blossom light of the April campus, were some of the most charged 30 seconds she had spent in the company of another human being in years. He was finishing his thesis for the pre-law program. He was interviewing with the Chicago firm. He was, by all accounts, exactly what he had been building toward for 4 years. Ready, capable. A person who had made himself so through a particular combination of intelligence and discipline and the quiet, interior ferocity that some people carry without needing to announce it. She knew, because he told her, that the mock trial team had gone to the national championship and placed second, and that he had been named best advocate in the semifinal round, and that the Chicago firm had extended him a formal offer the previous week. She knew because a message arrived that simply read, "Chicago offered. I haven't decided yet." "What's the alternative?" She typed back. "I'll tell you in person, when I can. When you can." May 15th. She looked at the date on her calendar. The graduation ceremony at Harmon was May 12th, 3 days after that. I'll be there. I know. April dissolved into May the way the best months do, quickly, warmly, with the sense of something gathering rather than ending. Finals, grading, the last faculty meeting of the year. The particular end-of-semester feeling that was both exhaustion and release. The whole university in its final rush before the long exhale of summer. The graduation ceremony was on a Saturday, held on the main quad, the kind of ceremony that had probably been held on that same quad for 100 years. The folding chairs and the platform and the faculty in their academic regalia walking in the procession, while the school band played something appropriately solemn. Katrin walked in the procession with her colleagues, her black robe and the green and gold hood of her degree over her shoulders, feeling, as she always did at graduation, the weight of what it meant to mark this kind of passage in a person's life. She found him in the crowd without looking for him. She always found him without looking, the same way she always had. He was sitting in the third row of the student section, which made her smile in a way she turned quickly into a professional expression, because of course he was in the third row. He was wearing his cap and gown, and underneath it she could see the white collar of the shirt he had worn the first day of class. And when the angle was right, and the May sunlight was falling across the quad in that particular golden way it had in the late morning, she could see the Baldwin novel tucked into the folder on his lap with his diploma. He did not carry it out of sentiment. She knew that. He carried it because he was still reading it, still in conversation with it, because Devin Okafor was the kind of person who was always in conversation with something, always in the middle of a thought, and the Baldwin novel was part of the ongoing thought that had been running since September. She watched him walk across the platform when his name was called. She watched him shake the university president's hand. She watched him take his diploma and look out at the quad from the platform with the morning light full in his face. And she thought about the question he had asked on the first day of class. The real one, the one he had asked like a man who had been sitting with it for a long time. What if the most honest sentence is the one you're most afraid to say out loud? She had the answer now. She had known it since December, since the 4 words in the margin, maybe longer than that, maybe since the Wednesday in October, when she had seen herself sitting in the third row chair and understood what was missing from the world she liked just fine. He found her after the ceremony in the crowd of families and photographers and flying mortarboards, which she had not expected. She was with a group of her colleagues near the edge of the quad, exchanging the end-of-year pleasantries that faculty exchange at these events, and she became aware of him approaching from the periphery, which she recognized was something she would probably always be aware of, from any distance, for the rest of her life. He stopped at a respectful distance. He waited until she turned. When she turned, she saw that he was carrying his cap in one hand and his diploma in the other, and that he was smiling, the real smile, not the private one he kept mostly to himself, but a full, open one, the smile of a man who has just crossed a line he has been walking toward for a long time. He addressed the group around her with easy confidence. "Professor Mercer, thank you for the best class I took in 4 years. You earned it, Mr. Okafor. I'll see you Thursday." Simple. Already decided. He turned and walked back into the crowd of his fellow graduates and their families, and her colleagues around her made the pleasant sounds faculty make when a student says something gracious. And Katrin looked at the place where he had been standing and felt the whole long geometry of the last 8 months settle into its final shape. Everything lined up the way things line up when they have been moving in the same direction from the beginning. Her colleague, Dr. Adkins, leaned close. "Good student? The best." Thursday arrived. She had thought about it too much to think about it anymore. which is the particular state of anticipation that gets you through the last hours before something you have been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become its own kind of normal. She wore what she would normally wear on a day off. She told herself not to overthink the wearing of things. She overthought it anyway, changed twice, and arrived at the small Italian restaurant on Bellamy Street, 3 miles from campus, at exactly 7 o'clock. He was already there. He was sitting at a table near the window, which she had expected because he was always in the 3rd row and always arrived before her and always knew where to look. And he stood up when she walked in with the ease of someone who has been waiting comfortably, not impatiently, just present. He was wearing a dark jacket over a white shirt, and he looked, in the warm amber light of the restaurant, like everything she had been writing around since December. "You cut your hair," he touched the back of his neck. "Last week. It looks good." Something moved across his face, an expression caught between amusement and restraint. "You look..." He paused, turning a thought over carefully. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this without it sounding like something from one of my bad early drafts." She sat down. "Try anyway." He settled across from her. "You look like yourself. Like the version of yourself that exists when no one is requiring anything from you. I've been trying to see that version since September." She looked at him across the small table. The restaurant was warm and quiet. Other couples and groups at the nearby tables. A candle between them. The city moving outside the window in its ordinary evening way, indifferent to the fact that this was the first time they had sat across from each other, without the university's invisible architecture separating them. "What was the alternative?" she asked. "To Chicago?" He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded letter on the table between them. She picked it up and opened it. It was an acceptance letter. Not from the Chicago firm, from the Harmon MFA program in creative writing, dated February of this year. She read it, set it down. "When did you get this?" "February 14th, he said, "which I did not plan, but did appreciate. You applied to the MFA program. In November, before I knew how the semester would end. I applied because of an essay I wrote about hands, and a comment in the margin that said, 'Keep going,' and a person who read my work 3 times. She looked at the letter on the table between them. The Chicago firm. I called them last month. I declined. He held up a hand before she could speak. It was the right decision. It was the decision I made before any of this." He gestured at the small space between them, the candle, the table, the 8 months of careful accumulation that had brought them here. "I need you to know that. I need you to know it wasn't because of you, it was mine. My decision, for my reasons." "But..." The corner of his mouth lifted. "But I'm very glad I'm staying." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, the Bellamy Street evening moved past, the streetlights coming on in the dusk, the city doing what it always did, beautiful and indifferent. She thought about the glass wall and both sides of it, and what it had felt like to stand on hers for so long with the full view. "I have to tell you something." He leaned slightly forward. "Tell me." "The fellowship. The Harmon Writing Fellowship you won in November." She watched his face carefully. "I submitted your work. I didn't tell you because I wasn't ready to explain the full reason why. The full reason was that your writing deserved to be seen. And that was true. But there was another reason underneath that, which was that I had been reading your essays at 2 in the morning and thinking about them at 7. And I needed to do something with what I was feeling that wasn't crossing any of the lines I needed to not cross. And giving your work the audience it deserved was the one thing I could do that was both true to what I felt and appropriate to who we were. He was quiet for a moment. The candle moved between them. Then quietly, with no edge to it, "You submitted me for the fellowship because you were in love with me and couldn't say it." She held very still. "Katrin." "Yes." He looked at her. Just that. He looked at her across the small table with the candle between them and the city outside the window and the 8 months of everything behind them. And the look was not triumphant, not validated in the way of someone who was right about something. Just the look of a person seeing something clearly for the first time, after a long time of knowing it was there. He reached across the table. He turned his hand, palm up on the white tablecloth. He waited. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She placed her hand in his. The warmth of it moved through her from that point of contact outward, through her palm and her wrist and up through her entire arm and into her chest, the way warmth spreads through cold rooms, gradually and then all at once. His hand closed around hers, not tightly, not possessively, the way he did everything, with deliberate and unhurried care. Neither of them said anything for a while. They did not need to. Dinner lasted 3 hours. They talked about everything and nothing in the specific way of people who have been waiting a long time to talk, without the architecture of appropriate distance telling them when to stop. He told her things he had not put in any essay. She told him things she had not told anyone. They talked about Atlanta and Columbia and the choices that had made them and the choices still ahead. They talked about the MFA program and what he wanted to do with the writing. They talked about her novel, which she admitted was 40 pages long and set loosely around a bookstore on a rainy evening, and 2 people, and a question about honesty. Is it autobiographical? A small smile behind the question. It is written around the edges of something real. Like a heat source. She looked at him. Yes, exactly like that. They left the restaurant at 10 o'clock and walked out into the May evening, which was warm and star-heavy, the kind of night that old cities arrange for in their better moments. They walked without deciding to walk, south along Bellamy Street toward the river, past the closed bookshops and the lit-up cafe windows and the couples on the stone bridge over the canal, who were doing what couples do on warm spring nights. He had her hand. She had his. It was not a dramatic thing. It was the most natural thing she had done in a long time. At the stone bridge, they stopped and looked at the water below, the city lights moving on its surface, the distant sound of music from somewhere south along the canal. She was aware of the whole length of him beside her, the warmth of him in the night air, the way he stood close to her now without the professional foot and a half that had been the whole grammar of their closeness for 8 months. He turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. In the May night, with the city lights on the water below them and the sound of distant music and the warm air carrying the last of the cherry blossoms from somewhere across the city, he looked at her the way he had looked at her on the first day of class, like he had a real question and was actually waiting for the answer. He did not ask a question. He lifted his free hand and touched her face, very slowly, with the particular deliberateness of someone who has been waiting a long time to do a careful thing. His hand was warm against her cheek. She let herself lean into it, just slightly, the way you lean toward warmth. He said her name, just her name. Yes, she said. He kissed her, not urgently. Not after 8 months of waiting in the desperate, crashing way of things too long denied. The way he did everything, slowly, deliberately, with full attention, as if there were nothing else in the world worth attending to, as if this moment were not the resolution of something, but the beginning of it. His hand at her face and hers at his chest, and the city below them reflected in the moving water and the music from somewhere along the canal. And she thought briefly and clearly, I have been waiting to feel like this for a very long time. And then she stopped thinking anything at all. What happened after the stone bridge is the kind of thing that belongs to the two people it happened to. She will say later, to the blank page of the novel that is still being written, that there is a specific kind of warmth that lives in a room where two people have finally stopped pretending, and the warmth is different from every other warmth because it carries inside it everything that was held back to produce it, all the months of care and restraint and chosen patience. And when it is finally allowed to exist in a room, it fills the entire room, every corner, every quiet place. And the room is different after that, permanently and completely. The way rooms are different after rain has moved through the windows, and the air has changed. She will say that his hands were exactly what she had imagined, from reading an essay about his grandmother's hands in September. Deliberate and careful and completely attentive, the hands of someone who believes that the things you do when you think no one is watching are the most honest thing about you. And she thinks about that now, sometimes, the honesty of hands. The rest, the warmth in the dark of her apartment and the city outside the window going quiet in the early hours, the way the night gathered around the two of them and held them there, gently and without comment, the way nights do when the right thing is finally happening in the right room, all of that belongs to them. She will only say, and she does say it, in the 43rd page of the novel she is writing, the one that is set around the edges of a heat source without ever naming it directly, that the honest sentence is always the one you're most afraid to say out loud, and the bravest thing she ever did was write 4 words in the margin of a 30-page essay and hand it back with all the others, and trust that the right person would know what they meant. The night passed. The city slept. The May sky outside went from dark to that particular deep blue that arrives just before the first light, the color of something about to begin. They did not figure everything out in one night. Real things do not work that way. He started the MFA program in September. She finished the first draft of her novel in August and sent it to an agent in New York who had been asking her when she was going to write fiction for 3 years. He wrote every day, morning pages in the notebook he kept on the kitchen table of the apartment he found 2 neighborhoods from hers, and she read the pages when he let her, which was not every day, but often enough that she felt the work growing under his hands the way she had felt it growing in his essays, closer and closer to the center of something real. They fought once, badly in October, about the Chicago offer he had turned down, and whether he had turned it down for the right reasons, and whether she had somehow, inadvertently, altered the direction of his life in a way he might one day resent. He told her, plainly and without defensiveness, that he had made his choice with full knowledge of what he was choosing, and that if she started taking credit for his decisions, she was going to have to start taking credit for his successes too, which he did not think she was fully prepared for. It was the most clarifying fight she had ever had with anyone. It ended in her laughing at the kitchen table and him making them both tea he actually finished. In December, she submitted the novel. She did not tell him for 3 days, and then she told him over dinner at the Italian place on Bellamy Street, the same table near the window, the same candlelight, and he looked at her across the table exactly the way he had looked at her the first time, with the real question, the one where he was actually waiting for the answer. How does it feel? Like saying the most honest sentence out loud. A quiet nod. Yeah. He reached across the table. He turned his hand palm up on the white tablecloth. She had been here before. She knew what this meant. She placed her hand in his. In May, 1 year after the graduation ceremony on the main quad, they went back to the stone bridge over the canal on an evening that was warm and star-heavy in exactly the way the first one had been. The city doing its faithful impression of itself. Beautiful and indifferent. He had a new Baldwin novel. She had the first printed copy of her manuscript, the pages she had printed just to hold them, to feel the weight of them. Read me the first line. She opened to the first page. She kept telling herself it was nothing, and nothing does not make your hands shake. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's the one. I know. He looked at her with the full open smile, the one she had been collecting for a year. Every instance of it filed somewhere in her that had no name, but which felt, in the accumulated weight of all those smiles, like something structural, like a thing you could build on. I have something to tell you. He turned slightly, a careful deliberateness in his movement. I submitted a piece to the Southern Review last month. Without telling you, I wanted to know if it was good on its own before I showed it to you. And they accepted it. She stood there on the stone bridge with the city lights moving on the water below and the May night warm around them and the weight of her manuscript in her hands. And she looked at this man, this tall, deliberate, careful man who had walked into her 8 o'clock class with a Baldwin novel and a real question and stayed. And she felt something she had been circling for a long time without knowing it was the destination. I am so proud of you. He took the manuscript from her hands and set it on the stone railing of the bridge with great care. He pulled her in by the lapels of her coat and kissed her in the May night on the stone bridge. And the city reflected below them in the moving water was very beautiful. And somewhere along the canal, the same music was playing, or music very like it, as if the city had been holding the scene ready all along, waiting for the right moment to resume it. She will tell you, if you ask her, about the plant on the windowsill, the one she kept forgetting to water. She will tell you that the day after she went home from the small Italian restaurant on Bellamy Street for the first time, she watered it, and she has not forgotten to water it since. She will tell you that plants, like all living things, do not require grand gestures. They require consistent daily attention. The small repeated choice to show up, to give the necessary thing, to not let a good thing die from neglect. He will tell you, if you ask him, about the essay he wrote in September of his senior year, the one about his grandmother's hands. He will tell you he has not written anything since then that he is more proud of, except possibly the piece the Southern Review accepted, and a piece he wrote last January that he has not shown anyone yet, about waiting, about the particular quality of patience that is not passive but active, that is not absence but presence in a different form. Patience that feels like the thing itself, like the waiting and the having, are finally, somehow, the same thing. He will say, if you press him, that the most honest sentence is the one you're most afraid to say out loud. She will say the same. Neither of them is afraid anymore. She called it gratitude for 8 months. She told herself it was professional admiration and intellectual affinity and the natural warmth a teacher feels toward a promising student. She built a whole architecture of reasonable explanations, and she lived inside them very carefully and very professionally, and she meant every single one of them, as far as they went. But his hands, His hand said something different from the first essay. His hand said something different on the coffee table in the bookshop cafe with the rain on the window. His hand said something different in the margin of a 30-page story about two people in a glass wall and what it costs to stand on one side of it too long. And her hands, hers, said it back. 4 words in a margin. I know. Me too. The most honest sentence. The one she was most afraid to say out loud. She said it anyway.